The Gothic Revival architecture of Georgetown University's Gaston Hall provided a dramatic backdrop for what was billed as a nonpartisan discussion on youth political engagement. The venue, with its soaring arches and stained glass windows, had hosted presidents, foreign dignitaries, and Nobel laureates throughout its storied history. Tonight, it would witness something unprecedented, a political confrontation between a sitting congresswoman and the youngest member of America's most controversial political dynasty. The event had been organized by the Georgetown University student government as part of their annual Democracy Week, intended to showcase different perspectives on civic engagement and political participation. 3,000 students packed the historic hall, with hundreds more watching via live stream from overflow locations across campus. The organizers had expected a civil discussion between generational perspectives on American politics. What they got instead would become the most explosive political moment in university history. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had accepted the invitation as part of her ongoing effort to engage with young voters and encourage political participation among college students. Her reputation for thorough preparation and devastating political confrontations had grown exponentially since her election. But tonight she had come to Georgetown simply to discuss policy and inspire student activism. She wore a professional burgundy blazer that projected authority while remaining approachable, and her leather portfolio contained what she assumed would be standard talking points about voting rights and civic engagement. Barron Trump's presence at the event had been a surprise addition, announced only 48 hours earlier through the university's conservative student organization. At 18 years old and a Georgetown freshman, Barron had maintained a relatively low public profile compared to his older siblings, focusing on his studies while carefully avoiding the political spotlight that had defined his family for years. His decision to participate in a public political forum marked his first significant step into the arena that had consumed his father's life and divided his family. The first hour of the discussion proceeded as planned, with both speakers addressing questions about voter engagement, social media's role in politics, and the challenges facing young Americans. Jasmine delivered thoughtful responses about policy solutions and the importance of sustained political engagement beyond election cycles. Barron spoke carefully about his generation's unique perspective and the need for fresh approaches to long-standing problems. The audience appreciated the civil tone and substantive discussion, and organizers congratulated themselves on facilitating exactly the kind of constructive dialogue they had hoped to create. The shift began when a student asked about authenticity in politics and whether young politicians could truly represent generational change or simply advancing carefully crafted images designed to appeal to specific demographics. Jasmine's response was personal and heartfelt, discussing her own journey from civil rights lawyer to congresswoman and the importance of maintaining core principles while adapting to political realities. Her authenticity was evident in every word, and the audience responded with genuine appreciation for her candor. Barron's response began thoughtfully, but gradually revealed an edge that hadn't been present earlier in the evening. He spoke about the difference between genuine conviction and what he called performative progressivism, suggesting that some politicians adopted trendy positions without truly understanding their implications or consequences. His words were carefully chosen, but the target of his criticism was becoming increasingly clear. The moment that changed everything came when Barron directly addressed Jasmine during his response to a question about policy versus politics. Congresswoman Crockett represents what I see as a troubling trend in contemporary politics, he said, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had grown up around political discourse. Politicians who adopt whatever positions poll well with their base without considering long-term consequences or practical implementation. It's what I call woke politics, all rhetoric and moral posturing with very little substance. The auditorium fell silent as the personal nature of the attack became clear. This was no longer an academic discussion about political theory. It had become a direct confrontation between two very different perspectives on American politics. Jasmine's expression remained composed, but something shifted in her posture that suggested she was moving from discussion mode to combat mode. I find that interesting coming from someone whose entire family has built their political brand on exactly that kind of positioning, she replied calmly. But I'm curious about your perspective on authenticity, Barron. How do you define genuine political conviction versus, as you put it, performative politics? Barron's confidence remained intact as he responded. I think genuine conviction means holding consistent positions regardless of political consequences and being willing to acknowledge when popular positions might not be practical or beneficial. Too many politicians today simply tell their audiences what they want to hear rather than what they need to hear. Jasmine nodded thoughtfully, her fingers drumming lightly against her portfolio in a rhythm that students in the front rows would later describe as predatory. That's a fascinating perspective on consistency and authenticity. Since you've raised the question of saying one thing in public while believing something different in private, perhaps we should examine that more closely. She paused, her eyes meeting Barron's directly across the stage. I'm particularly interested in your views on authenticity because I have some questions about the consistency between your public statements tonight and your private conversations with friends and classmates. The audience sensed the shift immediately. This was no longer an academic exchange. It was about to become something much more personal and potentially devastating. Barron's confident expression flickered slightly, a momentary uncertainty that suggested he sensed a trap being set, but couldn't yet see its dimensions. I'm not sure what you're implying, Congresswoman. I've been completely honest in my remarks tonight. Have you? Jasmine reached into her portfolio and withdrew her phone, placing it deliberately on the podium between them. Because I have evidence that suggests your private views on politics, and specifically on your own family's political legacy, are quite different from what you've shared with this audience tonight. The silence in Gaston Hall was complete. 3,000 students leaned forward in their seats, sensing they were about to witness something unprecedented in university history. Even the technical crew stopped their routine equipment checks, understanding that whatever was about to happen would require their complete attention. What you're about to hear, Jasmine continued, her voice carrying across the silent auditorium, is a recording from a private conversation that took place in your Georgetown dormitory on September 23rd of this year. The conversation was recorded by one of your roommates who was concerned about the disconnect between your public statements supporting your family's political positions and your private criticisms of those same positions. Barron's face went pale as the implications of her words sank in. Any such recording would be a violation of privacy and probably illegal. It's not illegal when recorded by a concerned citizen in a shared living space where there's no expectation of privacy, Jasmine replied calmly. And given your public statements about political authenticity and consistency, I think the Georgetown community deserves to hear your actual views rather than the carefully crafted positions you've shared tonight. Her finger hovered over the play button, and the weight of that simple gesture filled the massive auditorium with tension. Barron, you've spoken tonight about the importance of honesty in politics and criticized what you call performative progressivism. Let's see how your private conversations align with those public positions. The audio that filled Gaston Hall was crystal clear, obviously recorded on a modern smartphone with excellent sound quality. Barron's voice was unmistakable, and his words were devastating to everything he had said during the evening's discussion. The recording captured him in casual conversation with roommates, discussing his genuine political views and his complex relationship with his family's political legacy. His tone was completely different from his public persona, less careful, more cynical, and brutally honest about his actual beliefs. The most shocking portion of the recording came early, when Barron's voice clearly stated his real views on his father's political career. The whole MAGA thing is completely insane, his recorded voice said. Dad knows it, the family knows it, and anyone with half a brain knows it. It's all performance art designed to keep the base angry and engaged. The policies don't matter. The only thing that matters is maintaining the emotional connection with supporters who feel like the country has left them behind. But the revelations became even more explosive as the recording continued. Barron's voice could be heard discussing specific policy positions that directly contradicted everything his family represented publicly. Climate change is obviously real and obviously caused by human activity, His recorded voice stated matter-of-factly, "Anyone who says otherwise is either lying or ignorant." Dad's whole position on environmental issues is just pandering to fossil fuel companies and voters who don't want to change their lifestyles. The auditorium erupted in gasps and whispers as students processed what they were hearing. This wasn't just political commentary. It was a complete repudiation of the Trump family's core political positions by their youngest member. Several students in the front rows appeared to be recording the moment on their phones, understanding they were witnessing something that would be analyzed and discussed for years to come. The recording continued with Barron's assessment of immigration policy, an issue that had been central to his father's political rise. "The whole immigration thing is completely backwards," his voice said. "We're a nation of immigrants talking about building walls to keep out people who are exactly like our own ancestors. It's hypocritical and morally wrong, and deep down everyone in the family knows it. But it polls well with the base, so we keep saying it." But perhaps the most personally devastating portion of the recording involved Barron's discussion of his own political future and his relationship with his family's legacy. "I can't wait to get away from all this," his voice said, carrying a weight of frustration and sadness that was painful to hear. "The whole Trump brand is toxic, and it's only going to get worse. I'm planning to change my name legally as soon as I turn 21 and try to build a life that's as far from politics as possible. Maybe I'll become a teacher or work for an environmental organization. Anything that's the opposite of what my family represents." The silence that followed the end of the recording was deafening. Barron sat motionless in his chair, his face cycling through emotions: shock, fear, anger, and what appeared to be relief that his true feelings had finally been exposed. The audience seemed frozen, processing the magnitude of what they had just heard. Even the most politically engaged students had never witnessed such a complete destruction of a public persona in real time. Jasmine allowed the silence to build before speaking again. "Barron, you spoke tonight about the importance of authenticity and consistency in politics. You criticized what you called performative progressivism and suggested that politicians should be honest about their beliefs regardless of political consequences." The irony was evident to everyone in the auditorium. Barron had spent the evening attacking others for political inauthenticity while presenting a completely false version of his own beliefs and positions. Barron's response came out smaller and less confident than anything he had said all evening. Those were private conversations taken completely out of context. Everyone says things in private that they might not say publicly. But Jasmine wasn't finished with her systematic dismantling of Barron's credibility. She produced a second recording device from her portfolio. Actually, those weren't isolated comments. I have recordings from multiple conversations spanning several months, all expressing the same views and the same frustration with your family's political positions. She paused for effect, letting the implications sink in. This isn't about private venting or momentary frustration. This is about a sustained pattern of holding political views that are diametrically opposed to everything you've represented publicly. The second recording was even more damaging than the first. In it, Barron could be heard discussing specific strategies for distancing himself from his family's political legacy while maintaining the benefits of the Trump name for social and economic purposes. He spoke about using his Georgetown education to build credibility in progressive circles while carefully avoiding public statements that would completely alienate him from his family's financial support. Most devastatingly, the recording captured Barron expressing relief that his father's political career would eventually end and discussing his hopes that the family could eventually rehabilitate their public image through charitable work and distance from political activism. "Once Dad's out of politics," his voice said, "maybe we can actually do some good in the world instead of just dividing people and making everything worse." The impact on the Georgetown audience was immediate and visceral. Many students stood up in shock. Others covered their mouths in disbelief. The revelation that Barron had been living a complete double life. Publicly supporting positions he privately despised while secretly planning to abandon the family legacy that had defined his entire existence was almost too much to process. A student in the front row shouted out a question that captured what everyone was thinking. "Barron, which version is the real you?" what you said tonight or what we just heard. Barron's composure completely collapsed. His voice cracked as he attempted to respond. This is completely unfair. These recordings were made without my knowledge and are being used to destroy my reputation and damage my family. But Jasmine had one more revelation that would complete Barron's destruction and expose the full scope of his deception. She reached into her portfolio again and produced what appeared to be a printed email chain. There's something else the Georgetown community should know about your authenticity and your commitment to the positions you've expressed tonight, she said. These are emails between you and several Democratic political organizations, including climate change advocacy groups and immigration reform organizations. The emails, which span the past 6 months, show that you've been secretly volunteering for causes that directly oppose your family's political positions. The audience erupted into chaos as the full scope of Barron's deception became clear. He wasn't just privately disagreeing with his family's politics. He was actively working against them while maintaining his public support. The emails showed him using fake names and email accounts to volunteer for organizations that his father's political movement had demonized and attacked. But the most devastating email in the chain was one Barron had sent to a climate change organization, expressing his desire to make amends for his family's environmental policies. I know I can't undo the damage my father has done, the email read, but I want to spend my life working to repair what he's destroyed. Please let me help in any way I can, even if it has to be completely anonymous. The silence that followed this revelation was different from the previous pauses. This wasn't shock or surprise. This was the sound of witnessing someone's entire public identity collapse in real time. Barron sat with his head in his hands, the weight of his exposure overwhelming his ability to maintain any pretense of composure. Jasmine delivered her final statement with the gravity of someone who understood the historical significance of the moment. Barron, you came here tonight to lecture me and others about political authenticity. You criticized what you called performative progressivism while engaging in what can only be described as performative conservatism. You've lived a complete double life, publicly supporting positions you privately despise while secretly working for causes you actually believe in. She paused, allowing her words to settle over the stunned auditorium. The question isn't whether politicians should be consistent in their beliefs. The question is whether someone who has been this fundamentally dishonest about their own convictions should be lecturing anyone about political authenticity. The audience erupted in sustained applause that lasted several minutes. Students throughout Gaston Hall stood and cheered, not just for Jasmine's performance, but for what seemed to be a moment of truth-telling that had exposed something important about political honesty and personal integrity. The immediate aftermath was swift and transformative. Within hours of the Georgetown event, clips of the exchange were circulating globally, with particular focus on the recorded conversations that had exposed Barron's true political beliefs. Social media platforms exploded with hashtags like Barron Exposed and Trump Family Secrets, and the full audio recordings were downloaded millions of times within the first 24 hours. The revelations triggered intense media scrutiny of Barron's entire public persona and raised broader questions about the psychological pressure faced by children of political figures who disagreed with their families' positions. Mental health experts express concern about the long-term impact of living such a fundamentally divided existence, while political commentators debated the ethics of exposing private conversations even when they revealed important truths about public figures. For the Trump family, the revelations created an unprecedented crisis. The exposure of Barron's true political beliefs and his secret work with Democratic organizations represented a complete betrayal of everything the family's political brand represented. Conservative media struggled to respond to the recordings, with some outlets questioning their authenticity while others expressed disappointment in Barron's apparent political evolution. The Georgetown University administration found itself at the center of a national controversy, with some critics arguing that the university should not have provided a platform for what they characterized as a political ambush. However, most observers praised the university for facilitating exactly the kind of honest political discourse that had become increasingly rare in American public life. For Barron personally, The exposure represented both a crisis and a potential liberation. While his public humiliation was complete and his relationship with his family was likely permanently damaged, he was also freed from the burden of maintaining a false public persona that had clearly caused him significant psychological stress. In a statement released 3 days after the Georgetown event, Barron acknowledged the authenticity of the recordings and announced his intention to take a leave of absence from school to reflect on my values and determine how to move forward with integrity. For Jasmine, the encounter represented another milestone in her rapidly ascending political career, but it also raised questions about the ethics of targeting someone so young and the appropriate boundaries for political combat. Some critics argued that she had gone too far in exposing a teenager's private struggles, while supporters contended that Barron had opened himself to scrutiny by choosing to enter the political arena and attack others' authenticity. The broader impact on American political discourse was significant and lasting. The Georgetown encounter demonstrated that in an era of increased surveillance and social media documentation, maintaining a false public persona had become nearly impossible. Politicians and public figures could no longer assume that their private conversations would remain private, particularly when those conversations contradicted their public positions. The incident also highlighted the particular challenges faced by children of political figures who disagreed with their families' positions. The pressure to maintain family loyalty while developing independent political beliefs created psychological stress that could lead to the kind of fundamental dishonesty that Barron had exhibited. Mental health professionals began calling for better support systems for young people in political families who face these impossible choices. 6 months after the Georgetown encounter, Barron had quietly transferred to a different university under a different name and had begun working openly with environmental organizations. His decision to embrace his authentic political beliefs, while painful and costly, had ultimately freed him from the burden of living a lie. His story became a cautionary tale about the costs of political inauthenticity and the importance of personal integrity over family loyalty. For Georgetown University, the event became part of institutional legend, referenced in political science classes and student government discussions as an example of how quickly political discourse could shift from civil discussion to explosive revelation. The university ultimately decided that the event had served its educational mission by demonstrating the importance of authenticity in political life, even when that authenticity came at significant personal cost. The long-term impact on the Trump family's political brand was substantial. The revelation that their youngest member privately opposed their core positions and had been secretly working against their interests raised questions about the sincerity of their political movement and the sustainability of their political coalition. Conservative commentators began questioning whether the Trump political legacy could survive such fundamental internal contradictions. But perhaps the most significant impact was on political authenticity itself. The Georgetown encounter became a case study in the costs of maintaining false political personas and the ultimate futility of trying to sustain positions that contradicted one's core beliefs. It demonstrated that in contemporary American politics, authenticity wasn't just morally important. It was practically necessary for long-term political survival. As both Jasmine and Barron moved forward in their respective careers, the lessons of that Georgetown evening remained with them. Jasmine had learned that thorough preparation and commitment to truth-telling could expose even the most carefully constructed political deceptions. Barron had learned that personal integrity ultimately mattered more than family loyalty or political convenience, even when maintaining that integrity came at enormous personal cost. The Georgetown encounter between Jasmine Crockett and Barron Trump would be remembered as a defining moment in discussions about political authenticity and the courage required to live according to one's actual beliefs rather than inherited expectations. It showed that even in the most powerful political families, truth had a way of emerging when individuals were brave enough to speak it and prepared enough to document it.